Well, my friends, you thought you might have heard everything about Epstein, and there's lots of news out there. I've been trying to keep you up to date, and I'm sure other channels are. But today, I think we're going to dig into a particular rabbit hole, and as the video is titled, ask the question, is there an effort to create a false narrative related to Jeffrey Epstein? And I think the answer is clearly yes, but we have to ask who might be leading that narrative. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, which is the only place that you can find my content where I produce videos, news reports, interviews. We got lots of exciting interviews coming up in January after I finish the book and the documentary. We also have conscious music. We've got my books to download for free. If you want to order shirts and support, you can do that as well. You can follow us on Minds, Steemit, Discord. Sign up for our text list. I do highly recommend that because you don't want to rely on social media to tell you when I put out new content. You can also follow on BitChute. And if you want to support, do so on Patreon or Subscribestar. Finally, sign up for our email newsletter. So, in the recent weeks, I've touched on Epstein a couple of times. Well, I've been touching on the Epstein story, for the last 2 years, but I've been focused on 5G for the moment and other topics, and so I've tried to really stick away from just doing an Epstein video every time there's some tiny little new detail. I'll let other channels handle that. But I have noticed an increasing amount of Epstein stories. Obviously, the media is talking about it to some degree, specifically after his death. Now, the mainstream corporate media, for the most part, like let's say CNN, MSNBC, Fox, for the most part. Occasionally Fox touches on it if there's some sort of Epstein update. But for the most part, they haven't been deep into it. Every now and then, if there's something big they can't ignore, like, say, Prince Andrew, they will bring it up. But for the most part, the media is doing a reliable job of ignoring this big story. The only things that I have noticed, as I did in this video just a few days ago, Epstein update, Prince Andrew accusations, and Dershowitz on video. This is an article right here from the New York Times that we talked about, Jeffrey Epstein, blackmail, and a lucrative hot list. And it's them interviewing a alleged shadowy hacker who claims, again, to be another person who has access to the Epstein blackmail tapes. Now, the other person that claims to this is John Mark Dougan, who I did a video on the other day, also asking if we should trust him, because there are these different people popping up. And in this case, New York Times, they don't mention John Mark Dougan. They mention this shadowy hacker that tried to work with the New York Times and arranged meetings with them, as well as arranged meetings with the lawyers representing Epstein, and seemed willing to just sell secrets and make money. It seemed like he was willing to do that. But in the end, we don't know the truth about the matter. So that's one effort to sort of shape the Jeffrey Epstein story and claim that here's one hacker who might have the real tapes, and they apparently show Dershowitz in there, or at least a man with glasses. Him and his wife saw it and claimed it wasn't him. So that's one example. But I've also noticed an abundance of podcasts popping up. I found this one, The Mysterious Mr. Epstein. I just started listening to it. It came out again right after his death, about a month after his death, introducing the Mysterious Mr. Epstein. Then I found this one as well, Forensically Deconstructing Jeffrey Epstein. Came out back in October 23rd, I think was the first one. October 1st was the very first one. And they've done, as of just the other day, they put out part 11 of Forensically Deconstructing Jeffrey Epstein. There's also this very popular one, which I saw the New York Times writing about, Broken Jeffrey Epstein. And this actually features Julie Brown, who is the Miami Herald investigative journalist who was putting out their big series last fall. And I think this one's only about 6 episodes long. And then we also have this one, which we talked about in the last video, Epstein, Devil in the Darkness. And this is the podcast where they feature John Mark Dougan on this particular episode right here, special edition, the blackmail tapes, where they claim, like a couple other outlets have claimed, that John Mark Dougan, he went to Russia because he had people pursuing him because he claims to have met Joseph Recarey, who was the officer in Palm Beach who had access to the Epstein tapes, and that he let John Mark Dougan copy them, and he started getting harassed and he needed to leave the country. That same guy, John Mark Dougan, who's in this episode of this podcast, claims, of course, that he also was involved in the Seth Rich case and the DNC hacks. So he just happened to be at the center of two very big, powerful stories, and I kind of find that a little bit odd, right? So again, the question we're asking today, is there an effort to shape a false narrative? Because I'm noticing how many the stories that are being reported in the media and the corporate media, it's like everybody's in a race to lay the final history, because the idea is that Epstein's dead, right? Whether he's really dead, I think he is dead. I think it was a murder. That seems more than likely. Instead of keeping him awake, but that's always possible as well. I know some of you think it's a body double, it's Anthony Bourdain or whatever, but at the end of the day, he's gone. He's out of the picture. So the court cases have been shut down. The victims can't get any more, any sort of more support. There's also likely not going to be. We keep hearing that there's supposed to be more arrests coming, but so far no more arrests are coming. And I feel like it's just like the whole Q cult. They're just waiting for the mass arrest to come, and maybe they're never going to come. So now it's time to shape the narrative. What is the public going to think about Jeffrey Epstein going forward? Who are the fingers going to point towards, and who, are the accusations going to be hurled at? So you have the New York Times putting their version of events, claiming there's this shadowy hacker that visited with them and claimed that he had all this different stuff, and that he was trying to sell it to David Bowies, who's one of the lawyers who has a shady history but is now representing victims of Epstein. Then you've got podcasts like The Mysterious Mr. Epstein, and I haven't listened to every single one of these to see which particular narrative they're pushing, or if they're just pushing the same old message. We have Forensically Deconstructing This. We have Broken. And then we have this one, The Devil in the Darkness, and which is what we're going to focus on, because this one, I feel like, the more I've looked into it, it seems to be pretty interesting. So this podcast, Devil in the Darkness, was also partnered with this book, Dead Men Tell No Tales, which just came out in the last week on December 3rd. Spies, Lies, and Blackmail. And it's written by, as you can see, Dylan Howard. There's two other writers, journalists, and by the name of Melissa Cronin and James Robertson. So Dylan Howard, though, is the big name, true crime best-selling author. There he is right there on the left side, Dylan Howard, Melissa Cronin. And we also, and again, the other guy, James Robertson. So again, this is a partnership with the podcast. You can either listen to the podcast or you can read the whole book. But I did notice that they're reporting some details that I haven't seen before. This is why I'm focusing on this one. I haven't listened to the other ones, but in this, his final minutes, for example, chapter 11, they actually interview, or what it claims to be an interview, with Jeffrey Epstein's cellmate, and where he describes Jeffrey Epstein's last moments, and he describes them during the first attack when he was unconscious, that they just threw him on the ground and they were basically abusing him. They also interview ex-staffers and people who were his chauffeurs, and people who were involved in that. They play some of the recordings of the girls that I haven't heard before. And in this death or suicide, they kind of leave it up, death, suicide, or conspiracy, they kind of leave it up to you to decide what you think happened. But it's, for all intents and purposes, it seems like a very open-minded podcast, and they're definitely bringing new information that I haven't seen elsewhere, and now it's in the form of this book. And I also did notice that in the last few days, the Melissa Cronin, who's the executive producer, she did, actually this was 2 months ago, she did an AMA about the Devil in the Darkness podcast, and she says that she's investigated Epstein since 2014. I looked into her. She worked for Radar Online, which is kind of like a TMZ type website. It's a little bit celebrity tabloidish, but they often, like the Smoking Gun website, they often do have documents and, sometimes do come up with really good reports. So she also answered the questions here. And again, she talks about Israel, the connections there. She talks about the fact she thinks he was murdered. I even found this one just yesterday. We are the authors of Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and we have investigated Epstein for years. And this was with Melissa Cronin and James Robertson. So again, the two smaller names here on this book seem to be fairly open. I looked at some of the answers they gave here, and I'll put these links there. Excuse me. And they basically, somebody even asked them, if you were investigating Epstein for years, why did it take you until after his death to come out? And did you in fact talk about Epstein but no one listened? Says that we published articles back in 2014, 2015 on Radar Online about Epstein, Clinton, Andrew, and Orgy Island. We interviewed Virginia Roberts. We had hundreds of thousands of readers, but that reporting was like a tree falling in an empty forest. So they do say that, they've been working on this for a while. So those two people, as far as I can tell, seem genuine, and I haven't done a deep dive on them yet, and I'll show you why in a moment. Well, let me just tell you now, because I started to look up the big name that's listed here, Dylan Howard, the apparent true crime best-selling author. And I wanted to know more about him, because as I've shown you guys in past books, as we're talking about the narrative, especially now that Epstein's dead, there was a book called Filthy Rich that was written by James Patterson, who typically writes fiction. And he wrote the book Filthy Rich, and he told the Epstein story, and it is in that book I've shown you guys that that's the first place where there is a claim that Donald Trump threw out Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. And I've also done 2 videos debunking that claim, so for those who are still out there in the audience like, oh, but Trump didn't really know Andrew, Trump didn't really know Epstein, and all this stuff, or he threw him out, that's not true. There's just no evidence. But what I did show is that James Patterson, who again, typically a fiction author, he writes a book claiming to be the truth about Epstein, and this was back in 2015 or 16, and he doesn't really mention Clinton's role at all. He downplays Trump's role. James Patterson also lived in Palm Beach where Trump lived and where Epstein lived, and claimed that he hated Epstein. That's why he wanted to do this. And he does a full investigation, and then a year or 2 later, he writes a book with Bill Clinton and does a book tour with Bill Clinton. So you're telling me this guy, James Patterson, he did investigation and he's not capable of telling that Bill Clinton's involved and the Clintons are involved with Epstein? I don't buy it. So I was critical of that, and now I'm being critical of this. Dylan Howard is the main listed author for Epstein Dead Men Tell No Tales, which is a complimentary podcast to the Epstein Devil in the Darkness. And look, I don't know if Dylan Howard is just the big name they put on there and if Melissa Cronin and James Robertson did the actual work. All I know is that this guy, Dylan Howard, being involved sets off red flags. Here we go. Here's why. Because when you start to look into who he is, well, he worked for the National Enquirer, which is, a little shady, a little weird, but you can start to understand it. Private Eye details inner workings of National Enquirer blackmail machine. So you may remember this from way back in the beginning of the year, that this guy, Dylan Howard, who was involved with the National Enquirer, tried to blackmail Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Washington Post, telling him that he would release dick pics of his that they apparently had if he didn't, give him some. It was either give him an interview, and basically this seems to be, according to one former National Enquirer staffer, that the threats and the blackmail are part of their business model, which kind of fits the MO for this whole situation, Epstein, blackmail, etc. So we found this out earlier in the year when Bezos published emails from AMI's chief content officer, Dylan Howard, who threatened the release of a dick pic if the Post didn't relent on their investigation into AMI. And AMI is American Media Inc., is the parent company of the National Enquirer. And Paul Baresi, a private investigator who spent years working on cases that informed stories for AMI and other tabloids, says, quote, the National Enquirer had some people who would go to a celebrity and say, unless you give into a one-on-one interview that would amount to a fluff piece with us, we're going to report XYZ. The celebrity would then acquiesce to their demand. The nice way of calling it was quid pro quo, but it was really a blackmail. I know that the same methodology is practiced today. Obviously it's practiced because they did it to Bezos. Then you have Daniel Dano Hanks, who said he worked as an on-contract investigator for the Enquirer, off and on for 40 years, who used the phrase war of blackmail to describe their empire's ethos. I've known this newspaper's tactics for years, and I'd rather the truth be told, he said. The Enquirer has a list of which attorneys work for which celebrities, and if someone approached the tabloid for a story, they would approach the attorneys and say, make us a better offer. So it goes into describing a system of blackmail. Even the actor Terry Crews says that they tried to do the same thing and told him that they had pictures of him and with prostitutes and things like that, which apparently wasn't true. So Dylan Howard has long been involved in this. Under his leadership, the National Enquirer offered to pay for an interview with one of Bill Cosby's accusers in 2005, then allegedly turned over the file to the comedian in exchange for an exclusive sit-down with him. So they basically say, here, we'll interview your accusers, and then we'll give it to you if you give us exclusive interviews. Los Angeles Times reported in 2003 that the Enquirer paid a woman $20,000 for an alleged affair with Arnold Schwarzenegger, then never ran it and made him a consultant for one of their magazines. Most infamously, AMI has admitted it paid ex-Playboy model Karen McDougal $150,000 in hush money for her story of an affair with Donald Trump, which never saw the light of day. And we're going to get more into that in a moment, where AMI and Dylan Howard are accused of covering up for Harvey Weinstein and for Donald Trump. According to Ronan Farrow, which we'll talk about in a moment, Dylan Howard collected and turned over damaging information about actress Rose McGowan to Weinstein to help him discredit her rape claim. So this goes back a long way, and I don't think it's all just Dylan Howard. It seems to be the way that this AMI works and the way the National Enquirer works. But here you go. AMI executive Dylan Howard individually threatened the Associated Press with legal action over a story the Wire service published accusing him of sexual misconduct, according to former AP editor Ted Brittis and one other source with direct knowledge. So separately, it says when the Associated Press was preparing a story that would reveal AMI had effectively paid hush money to a source accusing Trump of fathering an illegitimate child, AMI hired the powerful law firm Bowies, Schiller, and Flexner to apply a continuous amount of pressure to get us to abandon our reporting. Ultimately, the Associated Press story ran, but only after months of delays. And an AP spokesperson told the Daily Beast that the Wire service did not initially publish the story because editors said it did not meet the company's standards. But, this just shows that this guy, Howard, is connected to, for one, it's interesting to see Bowies, who is the same attorney, again, defending Epstein's victims, or supposedly defending them, law firm Bowies, Schiller, and Flexner, that AMI hired them in order to put pressure on people who were investigating Donald Trump's apparent illegitimate child, and they helped pay hush money to a source who was accusing that. So they go around under this guy's leadership, Dylan Howard, who has written this book with these two other reporters supposedly revealing the truth about Epstein, has done cover for Trump, has done cover for other accused pedophiles. I found this one too as well, caught on tape. This is just back in November. National Enquirer's boss' secret plan to pay R. Kelly $1 million. American media executive Dylan Howard proposed setting up a shell company to hide the payments for a TV series about the accused pedophile. And you can read all about that if you want to get into those. We also have this one. This is more current. Former National Enquirer editor threatens booksellers over Ronan Farrow's expose. Ronan Farrow here on the left is an investigative journalist known for many different pieces of work. And this is Dylan Howard on the right. Again, the big name author right here on this book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell Motels. And he is trying to sue in using high-powered law firms in Britain, Ireland, Australia, and the U.S. to quash Ronan Farrow's expose, Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators, which is a book that just came out, actually, detailing how Ronan Farrow on the left was attacked by different people, including this guy, Dylan Howard, while he was investigating Harvey Weinstein and the whole Me Too scandal. According to two knowledgeable sources, Dylan Howard, in an extraordinary step for a journalist who claims to favor the free flow of information, has retained the services of New York's Kravitt and Vogel, Sydney-based McLaughlin Thorpe Partners, and London-based Tweed law firm in an apparent campaign to suppress Farrow's book, which was scheduled for publication on October 15th. Now, I did look. The book is available. You can see it right here. Now, I don't know if that means the book includes the parts about Dylan Howard that he was suing. I don't know if he successfully stopped the book from including that, but he was threatening Farrow and his publisher with a potential libel suit for the book. Howard's legal team has also taken the unusual step of warning booksellers that plan to stock the book. The law firm on 3 different continents are representing the 37-year-old Howard, who is a celebrity tabloid muckraker from Australia, whose efforts to gather opposition research on Rose McGowan on her behalf of her accused rapist, indicted mogul Harvey Weinstein, along with efforts of Enquirer owner American Media Inc. to purchase and suppress damaging stories about Donald Trump, are expected to be chronicled in this new book. So, Ronan Farrow is writing how Dylan Howard tried to go after Rose McGowan in defense of Harvey Weinstein, and apparently also bought and suppressed stories in what they call catch and kill, where they buy a story and then they kill it. And that's the tactic that different media outlets will do. And obviously we know that's what was happening with Epstein as well. If you look at this headline right here, the NBC had the Weinstein scoop. Why did they kill it? Because Ronan Farrow had been reporting about Weinstein for a while, and NBC knew Weinstein was up, but nobody wanted to report. They were all afraid. And it's the same exact thing that we saw with the reporter from, I believe it was CBS, saying that she had the Epstein story and they killed it. Maybe it was even NBC too. My point is here, that's 2 different cases, Weinstein and Epstein, of the media knowingly killing stories to try to keep them out of public view. So I don't know. I think this is just an interesting thing that we need to take into consideration and to realize that the media often covers up stories, and Ronan Farrow is doing a good job here of showing that. But in response, this guy, Dylan Howard, former television reporter for Australia's Channel 7, is suing, and in a text message, Howard told the Daily Beast that he, not AMI, is personally footing the bill for his expensive legal assistance. Now, interestingly enough, one of the law firms that he has hired is the Tweed Law Firm, which is named for the well-connected British lawyer Paul Tweed, who is a social friend of former Jeffrey Epstein pal Prince Andrew, and who has sent threatening letters on Howard's behalf to several UK booksellers. So think about that. One of the law firms hired by this Dylan Howard guy, who claims to be, the lead author exposing Epstein, involved with this book and this podcast, who has paid before to catch and kill stories about powerful people and sexual allegations, who offered to give $1 million to R. Kelly, a known pedophile and child, abuser, is now suing a journalist to stop the release of this book because it'll show that he was defending Weinstein, and now he's hiring a law firm run by a guy who's friends with Prince Andrew. I don't know. Do these connections mean anything? Perhaps not. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe this guy is just like a lot of people who deal in the tabloids. They're shady as fuck, and they are willing to do anything to get a story. They don't really care if it's, ethical or whatever. They're going to do whatever it takes. It could be that. Maybe he truly is doing good work, working with these other journalists and exposing Jeffrey Epstein. Or, as I said from the beginning, perhaps these people, we should be skeptical of them, and they are a part of somebody's agenda to shape a narrative about Jeffrey Epstein. And that narrative wants you to look one way and not look another way. Now, here's just another piece of information. Trump teen rape allegation resurfaces. Ronan Farrow claims National Enquirer tried to protect him in new book. Again, this is just a little bit more expansion on that same thing. Ronan Farrow's new book, Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators, claims that American Media Inc., the former publisher of National Enquirer, tried to help Donald Trump bury allegations he raped a teenager in 1994. And this has to do with the story of Katie Johnson, which I talked about in my documentary, Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein, last year. And other people have talked about it before. And of course, this is the case where she was trying to sue Trump right before as the election was going on in 2016. Again, Katie Johnson, known as Jane Doe, in 2 subsequent legal filings in New York, said she was raped by Trump at a party hosted by Epstein, and she was only 13 years old. And she said in a complaint here, she says, "I understood that Mr. Trump and Mr. Epstein knew that I was 13 years old." She says she was tied to her bed and forcibly raped by Trump and threatened. Her whole family was threatened with physical harm if she told anybody about it. And this story, Farrow says in his new book, was killed by the Enquirer. The Enquirer editor Howard and Trump lawyer Cohen, so he was in contact with Michael Cohen, were in contact frequently. Cohen, of course, was sentenced to 3 years in prison last December on charges including campaign finance violations for his part in hush payments to McDougal and adult film star Stormy Daniels, who Trump was involved with. So Farrow says there was no opportunity to buy this story. Still, Farrow says Howard, now chief content officer at AMI, tried to use his influence to convince Lisa Bloom, a powerful attorney who represented Jane Doe, Katie Johnson, to drop her client. In November 2016, just days before the presidential election, Bloom suddenly announced the press conference with Jane Doe had been canceled, saying Doe had become frightened after receiving death threats. 2 days later, Doe's lead attorney, Thomas Meagher, filed to dismiss the case, and Jane Doe has not been heard of since. So, speaking to Newsweek, Lisa Bloom said, "While the Enquirer editor did tell me he thought Jane Doe lacked credibility, that wasn't the reason she asked her and her other attorney to drop the case. After we received numerous death threats and my law firm's website and emails were hacked, she did not want to go forward. And I represented Miss Doe for free. There was never any discussion of money or settlement, as I strongly believe her allegations should be made public, given that Donald Trump was running for president at the time." And Paul Tweed, the attorney representing Howard, who is connected to Prince Andrew, says, "We have advised Mr. Howard to make no further comment about this." But think about that. That means that the threat that Katie Johnson's lawyers were getting and claiming to get could have come from Dylan Howard, the guy who was working for the National Enquirer, who we know based on other reports has threatened people and has done catch and kill to suppress stories, and was hiring investigators to go after Rose McGowan in defense of Harvey Weinstein. So this guy is just got shadiness and red flags all around him, yet he is the lead author on this book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and this is related to the podcast Epstein, Devil in the Darkness. Now, as I said, there's two other authors there, Melissa Cronin and James Robertson, who are out here answering questions, and they seem legitimate. Perhaps they are the real workers, and this Howard guy, who's controversial, is just the one who has the money to fund the book, and they did all the actual work. That could be so, and I'm going to reach out to Melissa Cronin, since they seem so open and willing to speak to people, and see if maybe they can answer why they're associated with somebody who's so shady. One thing I will finally say is that Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill podcast, which is now available in addition to this book, I haven't read either one of these or listened to it yet. It reveals new details and evidence. And so they're saying that in this podcast that there's new details and evidence related to Weinstein, related to the squashing of Trump stories, and the people who came after him to try to stop him from exposing this. And of course they talk about the Black Cube, which was the private investigators that were connected to Israel that were going after people who were exposing Weinstein. And so there's just a web of connections here, from Michael Cohen and Donald Trump to Dylan Howard and the National Enquirer, and that guy's running in the same circle as David Bowies, who's the lawyer who's defending some of the Epstein victims, and he's also running in the same circles of Weinstein. He's sending out offers of money to people like R. Kelly. He apparently has done hush money and covered for people who are trying to expose Bill Cosby. And my question here, I guess, is this all a part of an effort to shape a false narrative around Epstein? Like I started out from the beginning, saying there are lots of new books coming out. Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and Devil in the Darkness podcast, and Broken Jeffrey Epstein, forensically deconstructing Jeffrey Epstein, and the mysterious Mr. Epstein. We need to be skeptical. We need to think about all this critically, guys. I know this was longer than maybe you wanted it to be, as longer than I planned it to be, but we have to be skeptical of all this information. And I hope that this little bit of side research into some of the people who are out there giving interviews to the mainstream news and speaking publicly and getting the attention can get us to at least ask questions. Should we trust John Mark Dougan, who says he's in Russia, has the hidden Epstein tapes? Should you trust the New York Times when they say that this hacker claims to have the Epstein tapes? Should you trust any of these people who are out there reporting? I don't know. You could listen to all these podcasts. I'll probably eventually get around to all of them and see if there's anything new. So far, Devil in the Darkness seems to have some really new details. I definitely recommend checking out the one Epstein, his final minutes, right here. I will put these links in the comments. And maybe go through these answers on Reddit. You can see how they answered the questions and what they think about it. But I would keep an eye open and an eye on Dylan Howard and anything he's involved in for the future. We're going to leave it there, guys. Again, this is the Conscious Resistance Network. My name is Derrick Broze. If you appreciated this, I want to remind you guys that I am completely independently funded. I just did a half-hour broadcast here. Now I'm going to edit it up and send it online for you guys to watch. And the only reason I can set aside time to do this is because I have Patreon supporters and people who send in donations. And your money is going to fund my efforts and to fund our upcoming documentaries, The 5G Trojan Horse, an Epstein update, a Finders update, as well as my new book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. So please invest via Patreon or Subscribestar, invest via PayPal, send us crypto, or just follow and share the work. All of it helps and goes a long way. Until next time, my friends, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.